Eddy Zakes, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here, Will.
Eddy, you're about 2.5 years into ownership of a business that you acquired using a traditional search fund. The business model of your business is not one that I've come across. It blends brokerage with landscaping and snow removal. Landscaping and snow removal being two services we do hear a lot about in the search world, but this kind of combination of the two was new to me. So we're going to hear about that and whether people listening should themselves look for a business with this model. But to get us started, Eddy, let's hear some backstory, please. What led you to eventually want to go out and buy a business?
Fantastic. Great question. I think it's a strange path for every single search fund entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship, their acquisition journey is unique and should be unique. And so for me, I grew up in a solidly middle-class home, not from a titan of Wall Street, had never heard of the idea of search funds before, didn't come from a MBA type background, and after a good 10 years in the nonprofit sector, decided I was going to go down the MBA path. And like many people at IESE Business School in Barcelona, Spain, I discovered search funds. And at the time, I was on a very different path, and it was like, this is interesting, this is weird, but it's not for me right now. And after graduation, I had spent a little bit of time in and around the world of venture capital, and IESE came and asked if I would become the director of their Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center and lead their entrepreneurial programming for students, for executive, MBA, global MBA, et cetera, and kind of run that program. And as part of that, maybe 10% of that job was running the International Search Fund Center. And so suddenly I was in charge of the International Search Fund Center and had barely scratched the surface of what a search fund even was. And as I got deeper and deeper into the questions that I would get over the phone, over email, et cetera, I started to really, really like this idea. And when the time came, I was living in Barcelona with my wife and 3 children. At some point, we wanted to return to the United States. And when that came, it was, okay, what are we going to do when we go back to the United States? And entrepreneurship was the path that I wanted to pursue. And so it was, what form of entrepreneurship should that take? Should that be early stage investing, venture capital, accelerators or incubators, corporate entrepreneurship, doing some sort of technology startup or a boring non-tech startup? And my heart had fallen head over heels in love with the idea of search funds. And so that's the way that I went and raised a search fund. And here a couple of years later, I'm privileged to be leading a company called Earth Development.
Awesome. Well, I have some follow-ups there. Eddy, that was great, though. First, on our pre-call, you had told me that you had motivation to get an MBA that you thought might be a little different than a lot of people who kind of put themselves on a track, and the MBA is kind of one of the natural stages of that track. How are you different?
For me, like I said, grew up in this kind of lower middle class home, and was the first generation of my family to go to college. And when I was in college, you have academic professors and you have practitioners, the lecturers, et cetera. And looking at them as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, I was studying business. And I thought even then, like, if I could grow up to be one of them, that would be so cool, to be this maybe an early retiree that was giving back to the next generation of businessmen and women. How can I do this? And so, to teach at the college level, typically you need to have an advanced degree higher than what your students are pursuing. And so in business, this could be an MBA.
How do we pronounce IESE in Barcelona?
It's IESE in English, and in Spanish, typically they say ESA.
ESA. And ESA is kind of known around Europe for having the being the epicenter of search fund education, kind of a nexus, right? In the same way that Stanford and Harvard would be considered in the US or Booth.
Absolutely.
Great. So when you run the Entrepreneurship Center, having graduated with your MBA and now you're working in the university at the Entrepreneur Center running it, you're also happen to be in kind of the mecca of search funds for kind of outside the US, at least in this hemisphere.
and it's crazy because, I've never done a search fund. We were just talking before we started recording about, those who can't teach, and whether, it's very strange. I would get calls, and I can remember, the search fund concept is very attractive from a return standpoint. And I remember getting a call from an international executive who said, I am interested in investing in search funds. I've heard about this mythical return profile, and I have $100 million that I want to deploy into search funds. What should I do? And little Eddie on the other end of that phone call is thinking like, I have absolutely no idea. I've never done this before. I am not a search fund investor myself. I am a recent MBA graduate with no money because I've just foregone an income for the last 2 years. And so through tons of conversations with search fund investors and search fund entrepreneurs, both searching as well as operating, you start to figure out kind of how to answer those questions and direct those calls. And taking phone calls from search fund entrepreneurs who were rejoicing as they popped the champagne after a large exit, and they weren't sure who to call because they still weren't publicly announcing it, and getting that phone call where it's like, hey, I can't believe that I'd like made the round trip and I've exited my search fund, to entrepreneurs calling literally in tears, and doing a Zoom call with somebody on the other end in tears going, I don't know who else to call. What do I do? This isn't like this isn't working, and I need to figure out how to pull the plug. It painted a very real picture of the breadth and depth of search fund activity.
Mm-hmm. And when you said, Eddie, that you fell in love with it, and when you went back to the States, you were considering all the various flavors of entrepreneurship, but realized you were really in love with search funds. What is it that you like about it?
Sure. I think you'll hear everybody talk, and whether it's traditional search funds or any other form, about the community and the strength of the community, the collaboration that takes place. I think as an entrepreneur, the company that I started prior to the MBA was a construction company. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't cool. It was bricks and mortar as physical goods. It was a service that I thought that I could do as well as anybody else, or even a little bit better. And, I probably am not going to be the guy who starts the next autonomous vehicle company or artificial intelligence or augmented reality, startup. That's not me. I don't have those technology skills. I like the community aspect of it. I like the alignment of incentives. It's not perfect, but by and large, since the early 1980s, the model has worked really well. I love that you have this sort of captive set of advisors and coaches that you're tied at the hip, and they're helping you succeed, and you're not going it alone. Whereas, there are many other collaborative environments, but to me, of the ones that I explored, this was one that really stood out to me, where the prevalence of search fund operators who have successfully exited, then sticking around to return the favor for a financial reward, to be clear, but return the favor because they believe so heavily, so heartily in the model. They're drinking the Kool-Aid that they're pouring into the cup for you as well.
Yeah. Talk to us about the decision to do a traditional search fund versus self-funded, and just to make sure we're clear, at ESA, especially, I guess, due to the linkages with Stanford, the focus there was very much on traditional search funds. So it's kind of like what you knew. But so talk us through the decision to pursue that.
So I think that is first to recognize is that you're the composite of your 4 or 5 closest friends in your life or whatever, and you study a version, or your friends have pursued a version of entrepreneurship through acquisition. That's the one that you know the best. You know the pros and cons of it, but it still is the one that maybe is the most natural fit for you because you're the most expert in it. And so for me, yes, that is absolutely worth acknowledging. Additionally, though, being in my mid-30s and having 3 kids and having done this international adventure for about 5 years, having student debt, I wasn't a sponsored student in my MBA. I was a debt-funded student in my MBA. And so the idea of doing a self-funded search financially wasn't terribly realistic for me. I didn't have the same depth of a network in the self-funded space. I had an incredible network in the traditionally funded space, both of investors as well as, entrepreneurs. And so that was it. And then, like I said, I think having the sort of dedicated set of investors, mentors, advisors was a sort of security blanket where you knew that, when push came to shove, these people should have your back. And in my case, they consistently did have my back. And there was so much other upheaval going on in my life. There's, I think, what often gets ignored in the sort of selection of should I be a search fund entrepreneur or not is how well you handle ambiguity and uncertainty, where, you don't know. I didn't do a geographically constrained search. I have convinced my wife, and my children are young, so they're along for the journey. But, we could find a company in 6 months or in 1 year or in 2 years or not at all. And depending on all of those outcomes, we could end up living in San Diego or in, Portland, Maine. We could end up in the middle of the country. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin now. And you could end up anywhere. And so having that stability that even comes from a shared ownership of success through the investor group and through other search fund entrepreneurs, I think that was really attractive to me.
Mm-hmm. So you get back to the US, you decide to do a traditional search fund. You land in Minneapolis, where you're from, correct? You start your search. Tell us some about first, I guess, raising the traditional search fund, I hope was a little bit easier for you than others, given your connections that you must have had at this point. Anything to say there, just on raising the fund?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. I will recognize that, at times I felt almost bad by how easy it was. And at the same time, not bad because I had worked very hard to earn those relationships and build that network. And so, yes, when inevitably you get tons of phone calls from prospective searchers asking questions. And one of them is, tell me about your fundraising journey. And I usually lead off that call with, my path to this would be very, very difficult for you to replicate. For me, only thing maybe that I would comment on was, I looked at it from 3 different buckets of investors that I wanted to have. In my case, I did not proselytize and add any unexperienced search fund investors. All of my search fund investors in the search phase were mainline traditional search fund investors. And I looked at 3 buckets. I wanted to have a little bit that were institutional, a little bit that were OG investors that have been around the space for a long time. And then I wanted what I refer to as the young guns. And I wanted about a third of each of these. And an institutional bucket can fall into both OG or young guns. But I wanted about 1/3 that were, let's say, more professional, corporate style investors that had a larger team and resources that would come from that environment. And then the sort of OG, I wanted the maturity that comes from having been here for a very long time, that I have been through economic ups and downs. I have already achieved a level of financial success that hopefully makes them unflappable. I don't need to speak in order for my voice to be heard, because I'm, that sort of mentality from the OG collection. And then the young guns, I wanted people that maybe were willing to be a little bit more ambitious and swing for the fences, that had something to prove, that were going to step up and maybe contribute in a different way. And then the 4th bucket that was then applied to all 3 of those, the institutional, the OG, and the young guns, was an element of diversity. And not to say that I was the perfect exemplar of this or anything like that, but feeling like because of my relationships, I had some degree of choice in who I partnered with. I wanted to, where possible, prioritize female representation in investing teams or other minority or underrepresented groups. And for sure, we have a long, long ways to go. But I think for those that have the opportunity to push and promote that, I think that was something that was important to me and that I took advantage of as best I could. Again, very imperfectly, and there's a lot of work still to do there. But it was on my mind.
And going back to bucket A, the institutional capital, would that be like a Pacific Lake? What is that kind of the?
Yeah, Pacific Lake, Relay, these sorts of funds that are, in both of those cases, they've been around for quite a while. Sandro, at Relay falls very well in that OG bucket as a former, search fund entrepreneur himself who's been there and done it. But today, investing with a team that includes, analysts and vice presidents and principals and so on and so forth, it's a slightly different perspective than, say a single OG investor who works more independently. That was
Eddy,
the mentality.
On Pacific Lake, it's a name that you hear a lot, particularly when talking about traditional search funds. What exactly is Pacific Lake? Just tell people, you kind of just gave some details about it, but give people a picture of what it is and why this name is so closely associated with traditional search funds.
Sure. They're not an investor in my search. So I have had very little interaction with them. As I was raising my search, I had conversations with them, and Pacific Lake, as an example of others within this, they are a search fund investment firm that has outside capital, as well as obviously capital from their partners, et cetera, within the firm, that invests, as far as I'm aware, exclusively in the search fund space. As you're looking for sort of a lead investor, somebody that's going to have a lot of clout, they have a lot of capital that they can access relatively easily. And in some cases, that enables them to support larger deals. And I think we've seen the emergence in the search fund space of bigger and bigger deals. And so, these what I refer to as my nickname for them. I don't know that they would be defined as institutional from some, investing industrial standard. I don't know, because I don't come from that world. But in my head, they are the institutional type investors of our space. They operate, with a firm mentality. They, in terms of, they have different funds that are named and numbered, and they would have typically some sort of a life cycle or a term to that fund that they are thinking about, because they have those LPs on the outside, limited partners on the outside that they need to return capital to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for that. So it sounds like Pacific Lake is essentially kind of the leading name as a private equity. They're a private equity shop whose the funds that they raise, they're basically laser focused on the asset class of traditional search funds.
I think that would be fair. Again, I don't work with Pacific Lake directly, so I mean that would be the reputation, of them, as well as several others that are in the space.
Great. Thanks, Eddy. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've raised your money. You have talked to your wife. Kids are along for the ride. About the fact that you may end up, you really are truly geographically agnostic, and it sounds like you mean it. One of the dirty secrets, for lack of a better phrase, among kind of being geographically agnostic and the expectation of geographic agnosticism among traditional search fund investors is that, in fact, many traditional search fund entrepreneurs tend to buy a business close to where they're based. They don't actually go anywhere.
Absolutely true. The other piece of it, though, is your access to the owner and your ability through that access to build a tighter relationship and build a stronger bridge. So I looked at about 200 companies around the United States at varying levels, and I looked at companies from coast to coast, north to south, but ended up acquiring a company from Minneapolis in Green Bay. And part of that is if I were to fly to San Diego to meet with the owner, one of the things you're trying to do is establish rapport as quickly as possible and say, okay, I'm going to, Will, fantastic. I'd love to fly out to meet you. Automatically, that relationship, that initial meeting takes on a different level of importance. Now I am, booking a hotel and a flight, and they are hosting me, and they're going to give me a tour of their facility and take me out to lunch or dinner. And the whole dynamic changes to a level of formality versus if you're searching within a short driving distance of where you are, you can just stop by for a cup of coffee. Let's just grab lunch. It's grabbing lunch or grabbing a cup of coffee, or let's sit down and have a beer or whatever it might be, versus are you free next Thursday for me to fly out to see you? And so I think naturally search fund entrepreneurs find success within a driving distance, like a half-day driving distance. And I think the statistics on where searchers search from and then where they acquire bear that out.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I never thought about how just the rapport building has more kind of casualness and informality to it if you are within driving distance versus if you have to hop on a plane and it becomes this whole kind of production to visit.
Yes, and it also changes, I think, the dynamic of like your professionalism in terms of like somebody from another city. It changes it to a more private equity flavor, where it's this is a jet-setting, young, ambitious person who's going to fly out here and size up my company. It takes a different tone, I think, as well, just from a sort of industry or professional thing. And I don't think all of that's bad. I think certainly you would like to present yourself as professional, credible, all the rest of those things. But I think many owners have their guards up because they are receiving inquiries on a nearly daily basis. And many of them are from private equity. And many owners have a sort of
defensiveness.
Yeah, that's a
suspicion.
Good word. Defensiveness. Yeah, suspicion of anybody, not just and certainly now increasingly of search fund entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, no, that another great point. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it does position you a certain way in the seller from the seller's perspective if you're jet setting in on a flight versus if, hey, let's meet at the bar halfway between us, half an hour from me, half an hour from you, and we'll talk.
Yeah, and you share the same sports teams or you have the same local news. It's just different.
Yeah,
it's so much easier.
Okay, so and how far is Green Bay from Minneapolis driving?
About 4 hours.
4 hours. Okay, so give us a quick snapshot of the search process itself.
Those early days, it was what have I done? I have absolutely no idea what to do in terms of how do you actually start? And you don't have a good elevator pitch. And somebody says, well, tell me about my search fund was called Crosswalk Capital. Tell me, what's Crosswalk Capital? And the first couple of calls, you're trying to figure out how to explain it. And, how do I divide up my day? Am I going to do prospecting from this time to this time? And you've never held this in my case, I've never come from this sort of investor background. And so I've never done this job before and there's no one that's there to actually train you. And so the first week, I probably stumbled around like a crazy person in the dark, bumping into walls, trying to find my way until I found a light switch and it was a dimmer switch. It gradually got brighter and brighter in the room. I think, another interesting sort of story from that era for me was in traditional search funds, you'll hear that, commonly one or two of your investors or five, how many of your investors you'll naturally have a closer relationship to during different phases of your journey. Mm-hmm. And this was exactly the case in mine. And I've told the story enough times that I don't mind naming names because they know this and they actually are on my board today, Aspect investors. They wanted to have a monthly meeting with me, and there has been a push, and I don't know if it's maybe the pendulum has swung back a little bit more towards the center, but there was a stage where the role of automation in search fund prospecting was enormous, and I had peers that were using scrapers to pull all of this data down, and that was just the absolute opposite of my approach. And my call metrics and my outreach metrics were just a minute portion. And I would get on this call with Aspect and with one of their team members, BA, and he would say, well, how many calls did you make this month? And how many of this and how many of that? And I was mortified thinking I wasn't doing enough and that most of the people in this space, in the traditional funded space, are MBAs. We're competitive by nature. In order to be competitive, you have to have a degree of comparison. There has to be a scoreboard, and you're used to comparing yourselves to others. And my journey was my journey, and trying to compare my approach to anyone else's approach mentally got me into a bit of trouble. And it came to this sort of realization of I'm not trying to call the most people. That's not a contest that I need to win. I need to buy one company. And if I call 10,000 companies and buy one company, or I call 500 companies and buy one company, at the end of the day, the ultimate scoreboard is identifying and buying one great company for most traditionally funded search funds. And so very quickly what they were trying to do is they're just trying to make a conversation. They're checking in to make sure I'm doing okay. They weren't, their questions were completely benign. They were just, how are you doing? And the easiest way for them to ask that at the time were like, tell me about the calls that you're making and who have you talked to and how's it going? Are you making, good progress? Because those metrics, that activity input absolutely matters. If you're faithfully taking the steps day in and day out, generally good things will happen. And they just wanted to make sure that that was happening. And as I started to share, great conversations that I was having with owners, those conversations changed very quickly to like, how many calls are you making, to let's talk about this specific company. And initially sort of my fear, my anxiety about trying to match what others were doing, that was really hard for me. And I was a solo searcher, so I didn't have anybody to talk about this with. And am I doing this the right way? Whatever the right way is, am I doing this the right way? And I don't think today, we have these methodologies that are being taught at schools, but we're talking about the search fund model, and then how we actually execute it on a day-to-day basis. I think it needs to be customized to every single search fund entrepreneur, because just like you should be coming into search funds or getting your MBA for a very unique and personal reason, the style of your search also should be uniquely tailored to what you want to, the professionalism, the reputation, the style that you want to, the brand that you want to have as an entrepreneur.
But you persisted with your model. And so what was your model of outreach if it wasn't, scraping and super high volume? What did yours look like?
So it was a highly personalized outreach. It was industry specific. It was a lot of networking and reaching out to people and asking them for advice. I'm thinking about buying a company in this space. What do you think? And so for me, having spent about 8 to 10 years in the nonprofit sector, both as a philanthropic fundraiser, as well as an executive running a large private school, and as part of an executive team. I was not the executive running that school. I had this sort of specialty in ed tech, as well as technology that would serve the nonprofit sector. And those were two sort of industry theses that I went down early on. And so I would just call or email and reach out very, very authentically and highly personalized. Not necessarily this short email that's this like break down the door with this quick intro that's only 3 lines long. I'd write a small book and I'd say, hey, I'm interested in this space for these reasons. What would you say to your 30-year-old self if you were exploring this space? Is there anybody that you feel like I should talk to? Who is that? Can you introduce me to them? Can I get on the phone with you, et cetera? Obviously not all of that in the first email, but that sort of methodology. And that led to some great results. Early on, I had an opportunity with a SaaS solution for fundraising that was being used in mega churches, and it was a text to give platform that had a subscription fee to use the technology, but then they were taking a transaction fee on every single dollar that was donated. And so when you see a hurricane strikes and then the Red Cross says, text 12345 to make a $25 donation, this was the sort of technology that was underpinning that gift. Mm-hmm. And so the cost of switching for these churches and other nonprofits was super high, where they were concerned that maybe there was a better technology solution out there. But if there's any sort of automated giving, a recurring gift being made as a churchgoer making a tithe or whatever, if we switch it, we've got to go back to our parishioner, to our congregation, and ask them to resubscribe their giving. And they didn't want to do this. And so there was a tremendous pipeline of recurring giving that was going through that platform. Super cool. But yeah, early successes in that sort of space. And then maybe we'll go from there. I don't know. You're asking the questions, but I think the next question to me would be, talked about the pipeline of deals that were coming in. So this was proprietary outreach. This was me having an industry thesis. You have your sort of network where you're telling all of your friends and neighbors and aunts and uncles at Thanksgiving and all the rest, I'm trying to do this. If you know anybody trying to sell their business, very rare that something would come out of that like sort of personal network. And then the third one is opportunistic or broker deals or intermediated deals of some sort. And ultimately that's where Earth Development came from, was that intermediated space. Okay.
Tell us how you found Earth Development.
Yes. So that would be slightly, there's, I think, 2 different versions of this story, depending on who you ask. So one of my investors was the Cambria Group, led by Lou Davies, and Lou's a fantastic friend and mentor. And Lou, early on in my search, I think was trying to give me a bit of an attaboy. This is my version of the story, and maybe not Lou's version of the story, but I think he wanted to just check in on me and make sure I was doing okay. He knows that search fund entrepreneurship is lonely, difficult road, and he didn't want to reach out just to ask that question. So he attached a one-page teaser for a brokered deal and was like, "Hey, how you doing? Saw this and thought of you, and wanted to see if this might be of interest. If it's not of interest, no need to even write me back." So to me, it felt very much like a very soft suggestion, and so I kind of glanced at it, and it was for a landscaping company, snow removal company, and Lou has portfolio companies, and the intermediary had reached out to Lou thinking that this was maybe a good add-on acquisition for one of those portfolio companies. It wasn't at all. And so Lou, the way that I heard it originally from Lou was that Lou kind of looked at the map and said, who is geographically the closest searcher to where this deal is from? I don't love the deal, but it's kind of interesting, so I want to pass it on to someone. And so I was geographically the closest one. And so I get this from him and look at it and think, this is kind of strange. Traditionally funded searchers often don't buy landscaping companies. Is often is not a great fit. And so kind of slid it back onto the credenza behind me and said, that's okay, thanks. But I left it there, and I kind of kept glancing at it every once in a while. And through a couple of phone calls, I don't know that it was readily apparent on the teaser, but through a couple of phone calls, came to realize that Earth Development was operating primarily with a outsourced business model where we were brokering those services. We didn't own or operate the equipment directly. And suddenly that changed the attraction to it. And as they say, the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, let's hear now more about this business model. Why would somebody looking to hire landscaping services call a broker and need a broker and not just go online or use word of mouth to find a local landscaping business?
Great question. And it is one of our challenges constantly. So traditional landscaping is route-based, density-driven, super, super fragmented, and especially in multi-location organizations, one of their big challenges is consistency and just the number of vendors that they're working with. And so if you can imagine, Walmart or some other large company needing to employ, potentially thousands of landscaping companies, because landscaping companies don't tend to travel well, I won't drive 100 miles to mow your lawn. As a result, there is a space for the sort of aggregator like Earth Development to sit in there that, when you go to McDonald's or Starbucks, whether you go to Starbucks in Paris, France, or in New York City or in Green Bay, Wisconsin, you're going to get the same caramel macchiato or the same Big Mac, more or less. This is about risk management. It's about operational and reputational risks, even more so during the winter. And Earth Development offers a one throat to choke sort of concept where you're receiving one invoice, one contract, one certificate of insurance, one point of contact with an account manager who knows what's going on at all of your sites. And we essentially are vendor procurement for your team. And we are using our expertise that maybe your purchasers don't have to identify, vet, and manage the contractors that are on your site.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And so,
go ahead. Yeah.
And so your target market is going to be multi-site businesses. That's where this really becomes an acute need.
So yes and no. So that sounds fantastic, but this model works just as well for a single location. And so, Earth Development was started in 1999 as a self-performing company in Green Bay, and we cut grass and plowed snow using our own equipment and our own laborers for many, many years. And companies still call us because they know that when they hire Earth Development to do their snow removal or landscaping, regardless of who is on the site, it's going to be done with the professionalism that they know is the Earth Development difference. And so we continue to have many, many, many customers who work with us that multi-site sort of advantage doesn't factor in for them. I think what it changes though is the sort of access to resources. So if you have someone who is plowing snow at your facility, and it's just a traditional contractor that works in your region, even maybe just your neighborhood of the city, and his or her equipment breaks down, or his or her equipment operator doesn't show up to work that day, the resources that they have to fix that problem are very limited. When Earth Development works with hundreds of contractors, we have an army of resources that we can plug in. And so the confidence that no matter what, we can solve a problem is much higher. And I think that's very unique. And whether you're multi-site or a single location, that's, I think, a very compelling value add that we can have. So in a large snow event, where it is snowing, unless you're a very, very large site, very rarely will a single site have dedicated equipment. So if you're an Amazon distribution center, there would be dedicated equipment that would be parked at the Amazon distribution center. But if you're a dental clinic, we don't park a plow truck in your dental clinic. And so in a heavy snow event, that single plow truck is running a route and covering and trying to keep up with the snow as it falls. Inevitably, in a very heavy snow event, it can't keep up, and every snow company, including Earth Development, starts to have to think about how to prioritize. We'll take care of the hospital. We're going to take care of, the school. We're going to take care of this or that under some sort of scheme, while at the same time trying to satisfy and delight every customer. And so one of the strengths of Earth Development is, because we're working across multiple geographies, we can shift equipment from one region to another to make sure that we're able to meet the demands of that storm at a higher level than a traditional snowplowing company or contractor could.
You have kind of overflow capacity. When a local plower or landscaping team shows up to a site of one of your customers, they're wearing whose t-shirt? Their own?
Theirs. Yeah, theirs. Yeah. So we're running a two-sided marketplace. So we have, right. One of our customers is the end consumer of the services that we're rendering. And then the other consumer of Earth Development's, model is what we call service partners. We very carefully call them service partners. They're not service providers. They're not subcontractors. And sure, it's a little bit of semantics, but in our mind, they are the key to our long-term success. And so when we think about, which side of the two-sided marketplace, you can't exist without either side. And so it's not that one is necessarily more important than the other. But for those service partners, what we are doing is helping them to maximize their potential. We see ourselves as in a symbiotic relationship where when they do well, it boosts our reputation in an area. We are able to say, hey, look, down the street, we're taking care of XYZ property. Can we take care of yours as well? But then when that happens, our likelihood of continuing to subcontract that work to that great service partner is very, very high. And we're typically signing 3-year contracts with most of our customers, and we're signing those service partners typically to 3-year contracts as well. And so it's not an Uber type model where there's some sort of capacity flux where you're going to have a different Uber driver picking you up every day. In this industry, it's too important. The quality and risk management is too important to be switching providers, midwinter or whatever, unless there's an extremely compelling reason to do that. And again, that's something that's an advantage of Earth Development, is the ability that if somebody was underperforming, we have the resources to make changes where typically in another setup that wouldn't exist. And so yeah, we see ourselves as a form of outsourced sales and marketing for our service partners, where they maybe are at 75% of their capacity for the equipment that they have, and we can help them fill that in their specific region and boost their route density. And they're happy to do that because they're essentially getting access to what are hopefully juicy red premium partnerships that maybe they wouldn't have the same path to themselves.
Fascinating model. And so you just called it a two-sided marketplace, which is a business model that you hear a lot about online, an Upwork or an Uber. You're bringing together the drivers and the passengers, or in Uber's case, the contractor freelancers with the business person who needs them, the services. So one of the things, certainly in digital marketplaces, that you hear about is leakage, where the vendor and the end consumer, end customer eventually take the relationship off the platform, and the platform no longer gets its cut or its take, or however you want to put it. You probably have more diplomatic language for that, or its fee, whatever. Is that a risk here, especially in these long-term contracts, where if I'm seeing a team of landscapers show up to my facility every week, and I get to know them personally because it's been weeks and months that I've seen them around, I've developed, I say hi to them or whatever, at some point, maybe there's a temptation among some customers to take that relationship direct and cut you out of it?
Absolutely. It's a risk. We deal with it regularly, as in periodically. It's not something we battle day in and day out. It's not and again, that goes back to that idea of partnership. If we're identifying and selecting the right customers and identifying and selecting the right service partners, it surprisingly gets solved pretty well. And if we're demonstrating the value that Earth Development creates as the middleman, as the broker in the relationship, as long as we're demonstrating that value, I think both of them want to continue to partner with us. So a service partner also contractually is under a restrictive covenant that would include non-solicit and non-competes related to the sites that they serve. We obviously, as with them being independent contractors, we can't restrict their ability to grow their businesses outside of Earth Development. But poaching, I don't know that I have very diplomatic terms for this, but I mean, yeah, poaching or stealing our clients would be a big no-no for, our service partners. And amongst, the vast majority of our service partners, we don't have that. And part of that compelling thing is, hey, if you stick with us, our ability to help you grow your business together is greater than your ability to go it alone. Yeah, you might get that relationship and your margin or your profitability might grow, your revenue might grow on that single customer, but you lose access to the pipeline of work that Earth Development can provide you year in and year out. And that's a bigger deal, hopefully, for most of them. So I think it's pretty short-sighted on their part to do that.
Fantastic.
And illegal according to their contract, to be very clear. And at times we have had to chase that with, legal remedy. Yeah.
Okay. And again, about this model. So are you guys kind of the only, was this an innovation of the Earth Development founder, or is this a business model I just didn't realize it? Are there lots of Earth Developments around the country? And also, if you'd answer that, both in your space, but in other services spaces. So
not 100% unique. It's certainly would be considered rare. It's not very prevalent. It has been attempted on several other cases by other landscaping companies, and in some cases they have earned terrible reputations for Earth Development's type. The contractor, the overarching broker, winning a collection of sites and then looking to find a subcontractor to do that work at the lowest possible price in order for the contractor to keep as much of the money as possible. And Earth Development, while we're a business and we're trying to make as much money as we can't do that at the cost of our service partners being able to make a respectable living. And so, that sort of respect aspect where we have to make sure that we leave enough on the table for our service partners. So it's very common that you either are 100% self-performing or pursuing a hybrid model. Almost all of the larger snow plowing or landscaping companies are pursuing some sort of a hybrid, because inevitably what happens is you're taking care of a customer in your home geography, and that customer is multi-location, and they ask you to even take care of a site that's 25 or 50 miles away. Well, if it's snow plowing and it's snowing outside, driving 50 miles to clear even a fairly large site is not terribly realistic. And so then you're having to ask, should I buy another truck, another trailer, another lawnmower, staff that up with 3 or 4 crew members to take care of one single site? Well, if I hit a critical mass where I have enough sites in that location, I can open another branch there and pursue this like hub and spoke branch model that can be common in some of the larger companies. But then there still are going to be those outliers where you say, okay, I want to keep this customer and delight them. I want to be the holder of that relationship. And so in that 25 mile or 100 mile, or in some cases 500 miles away, you're going to find a subcontractor who can take care of that site for you. So the hybrid model is extremely common. Then the pure broker model that we currently use is far more rare. It does exist in our space. There are others who do it. We'd like to think that we're trying to do it better than them, and yet it is a very competitive space. The model exists in other industries as well. So there are several companies, well, I don't even want to say several, there's probably many companies who do this with facility management in general, on the broad side. So we have a competitor that does everything from doing turnarounds and dark store management and from painting to plumbing to electrical to HVAC to whatever, and landscaping and snow removal through a brokerage model. Certainly in the custodial or janitorial space, this model exists as a pure play within custodial as well. So it exists in various forms, all over the place. And and then again, in that self-performing and hybrid model for a custodial company as well, I clean offices in this city, and then the property management group says, well, can you come to the one that's 25 miles away? And we're like, no, I don't really want to, unless it's worth my while.
Thank you, Eddy. Well, let's hear some stats about the business and then return to the plot of you buying it. So you have already mentioned that the business was founded as a, what's the word? Self-delivery? Self-fulfilling? Self-performing traditional landscaping business in 1999. It evolved over the years, so it's about 24 years old now. How big was it? What can you share about size?
When I acquired the company, it was around $8 million in revenue in the previous year. And from an EBITDA standpoint was, I heard recently the idea of agreed upon EBITDA as opposed to adjusted EBITDA or anything else. I think that was very relevant in our deal, where maybe the true EBITDA in hindsight was lower than what was agreed upon, but you're in a negotiation and you're trying to get the deal done. So that EBITDA that was agreed upon was right around $2 million. And there were some adjustments made because our business is impacted by weather. And so, how much it snows absolutely can change what our revenue is, what our profitability is. And so an adjustment was made a positive adjustment to EBITDA was made that favored the seller, that in hindsight was probably a bit higher than it maybe should have been. And at the same time, the 2.5, 3 years later, it's sort of immaterial, other than that maybe the baseline when you're talking about the growth of the company, if you accept that the EBITDA base was lower than what you wrote on paper, it maybe helps you sleep better at night by the growth or the trajectory of the company. So, today Earth Development's around 16 million in revenue, and our EBITDA is more or less flat from where we came in. In that time, though, we've gone from working in 5 states. When I arrived here, it was me plus 5 employees or 6 employees, and today we're working in 14 states, have grown our client list, doubled our revenue, and are around 23 or 24 team members. Built a executive team that is, obviously expensive from a total payroll perspective. And so, that sort of classic J-curve story is alive and well at Earth Development. And, this year we are expecting to see our EBITDA begin to rebound to, the same sort of, let's say maybe slightly lower margins than the former owners had, but what we think is a healthy and sustainable EBITDA margin for our company. We're in a space, I think, that margins are really interesting discussion around, as a sort of paper contractor, as the broker, what sort of margin should you have, and how much should you be able to take in that spread between what the customer pays you and what you pay the service partner, and that's something that we're still, I would say, trying to get to the right size. Certainly, we don't think that if it was $8 million and $2 million in EBITDA at acquisition, again adjusted and agreed upon EBITDA or whatever, that's 25% EBITDA margins. That's an inflated number. That for us to be in the upper teens is probably more realistic, hopefully.
Okay. And the $8 million of revenue when you bought the business, for anybody who is a marketplace nerd like me, they might be wondering or just want to confirm that was true net revenue to you. It wasn't all the money flowing through because so if one of your customers pays $100 for landscaping, $100 flows through you, but you don't count all 100 as your revenue.
No,
you count your take. Let's call it 20%. We don't know what it is, but let's call it the $20 your take as your gross revenue.
No, we're talking gross revenue is pure dollars in the door at the very top line for us, and so $8 million in total gross is how we've always thought about it. Because of our former history in self-performing, et cetera, and sort of the hybrid that we've gone through, it has always been pure top line gross revenue, not net.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're selling $8 million of landscaping and snow removal services.
That was correct at that time, yes.
Yeah, that's right. And when you acquired it. Interesting.
And your method is not. I don't think that your way of doing it is a bad way of doing it. It's just not how we do it. Because I think what we're trying to do then is, our COGS essentially are the cost of our service partners to us,
right?
And then our operating costs are what it costs for us to run the business on the day-to-day basis with our own internal team.
But I guess I'm having a hard time, Eddy, if your margins, we're around 25%.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the margins those would be good margins for a self-performing landscaping business. So you guys have to pay for third-party landscaping, your service partner, and they have to be making their own margin internally. And you've got your own operational overhead, and you're still at 25% margins?
At that time, yes. And again,
right,
again, talking about adjusted and agreed upon, and maybe different accounting methodologies, et cetera. This is a story that is not, before we started recording, we talked about, this is a story that's not finished being told. And there's a part of me that, as I was, thinking about, what I wanted to share today or what questions you might ask, a sort of hesitancy of like, I don't know how, I'm 2.5, almost 3 years into this, and I don't know how this is going to end up. And to presume that I have it figured out or that I'm doing it the right way, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know how this is going to be in 5 or 7 or 10 or 25 or 30 years. And certainly, those margins at that point were a bit unrealistic, and probably even were, whether I was naive, entering, or there was, accounting practices that we have since changed and cleaned up and done differently. There's a variety of different ways to kind of cast that story. And today we're not at 25% margin, to be very clear. And at the same time, the snow side of, not everybody, many people are attracted to landscaping companies, and snow removal is a very different financial game than landscaping. Snow removal is risk management as opposed to maintenance or beautification. It's not just creating an attractive place; it's making a safe place that can, a storm can shut down your facility and make it so you can no longer do business. And so, in landscaping, technically, let's say again using that hypothetical Walmart, a kid with a single trailer and a truck and a push mower. I don't think this would be a good idea, but hypothetically, that kid could mow an entire Walmart, string trim, backpack blow an entire Walmart, and keep it looking good by him or herself. That's totally possible. I don't think it's a good idea, but it's possible. And so you're competing on the landscaping side against somebody who is willing to be a single sole operator. It could be a small town operator. It could be a very large company, but with a very different overhead structure to that single operator. When you get into snow removal, there's no way, even if it's a very well-equipped single operator, that a single operator can take care of an entire Walmart when it's snowing 1.5 inches or 2 inches an hour on Black Friday with tons of cars in the parking lot, keep the sidewalks looking good, salt everything and everything else. And so, the switch from light equipment like a riding lawnmower and a backpack blower to, a front end loader or a skid steer or, a 5-yard dump truck is a very different pricing dynamic. And so the revenue on the snow side is significantly higher than the revenue on the landscaping side. The other part that comes in there is different in terms of revenue format is different contract styles. And so, classically in search funds, we're looking for heavily repeating or recurring revenue, true recurring revenue. And so, when we look at the contracts that we have and thinking about margin in different years, and how one year you could have significantly better or worse margin. One of our contracts is a seasonal contract where you pay me $100,000 for the year to plow your Walmart. And I, depending on how much it snows, I am keeping more or less of that money. If it snows a lot, then I'm obviously my expenses can fluctuate even maybe above that $100,000. And so the timing, we would never try to time the stock market, and we would also generally not try to time search fund investments. But in my case, I acquired the company on a low on a year that had high EBITDA and relatively low revenue. I would say that, the structure of contracts is a sort of hedging mechanism that, again, most owners in a landscaping company wouldn't probably use hedging as the term that they would throw out there, but effectively there's hedges against different snow scenarios or landscaping scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about actually buying the business. What did the transaction look like?
Yeah, tricky is the first part. So I think all of them are difficult. This one was tricky because, first of all, landscaping business, not mainline traditional search fund company. Most just having it be a snow removal or landscaping company. There were some investors who were like, "What do you want to do? And why? Don't you know that we don't typically do this?" And I'd have to almost start from well, hold on a second. This is not a normal landscaping company. We're employing a different business model. So that selling of the investment opportunity to investors was an initial challenge. Working with the sellers was a second challenge. It was a husband and wife, and they were running this business very successfully. I mean, it was a great entrepreneurial success story for them. And as they were thinking about selling the company, they worked with an intermediary, with a broker, to sell it, and I participated in that initial sort of path, and it was a very traditional indication of interest, set of management meetings, the preparation of an LOI, a pre-LOI data room, and then a more detailed post-LOI data room. And in that first phase, I submitted an LOI, and it was a competitive process, and they decided to go forward with another buyer. And I was absolutely devastated. I had no idea. Everyone would tell you, don't get too attached to your deal. They can always fall through. Deals fall through all the time, and this intellectually. This, but there's no way that if this is the right company for you, that you shouldn't be getting at least partially, emotionally attached to it.
Yeah.
You should be starting to dream and think about, if this is my company, here's what I would do. And naturally, that's what happened to me as well. And so, in August of 2020, the deal fell through, and we were negotiating the LOI. Post LOI, it had not been countersigned, but we were negotiating deal terms, and it was feeling really good. And then they decided to go with this other buyer, and I'm left trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move on and start. And they tell you, keep other deals warm while you're doing this, and all that. Great advice. But as a solo searcher, I'm trying to juggle all of this, and my pipeline was pretty dry, and I spent another week kind of crashing around in the dark trying to find my way, and hung around the metaphor of hang around the rim and try to get the rebound, because their deal could fall through too, and so kept kind of pinging. Every couple of weeks I would ping the broker. And ultimately, the deal did fall through. And one of the things that is tricky is, to this day, I don't know exactly why the other buyer walked away from the deal, but that really damaged the confidence in the transaction process for the seller. And so they were a bit paranoid about how I was going to walk through the transaction, and I bore the consequences for the bad behavior of the previous buyer or the proposed buyer. And so it was not an easy negotiation. It was, again, there was a lot of secrecy around, we don't want to share this with you, because if ultimately it falls through, we don't want you to have this information. And at the same time, I can't buy the company unless I have this information. And there's a long back and forth. So from the initial time that I found the company, through Lou forwarding me this teaser, that was probably in May of 2020, and the deal was done in late March of 2021.
Wow.
I ended up searching for just about a year. In the end, I submitted one LOI, which was that original LOI that got rejected, and then edited that LOI after the first buyer fell through and acquired one company. So this idea of like spray and pray and send out lots of LOIs. Again, that deep personalization and shooting your shot with an owner, with a seller, trying to find your way into these deals. That was my methodology through and through. And again, it worked for me, but doesn't mean it would work perfectly equally for everybody else. And so, so you go through this process and you're trying to figure out, the sort of like, what would be the deal killers? What information do I have to know in order to be confident that this is the right one? And this one had several strikes against it. Is highly seasonal. At the time, maybe 85% of our revenue comes from snow removal.
How much?
85%.
Wow.
And, obviously that falls from, this month to that month, and, all of your revenue comes in during that phase. The seller had actively deprioritized landscaping, didn't really like landscaping. He enjoyed taking out his RV and enjoying and traveling during the summer, and wanted to be sort of on autopilot with a skeleton crew during the summer. And so unless the customer essentially demanded that we need one supplier for our landscaping and snow removal, we didn't really chase landscaping prior to my arrival here. Highly seasonal. And I think from my perspective, buying a seasonal business that's highly predictable is okay. So I would feel comfortable personally buying a Christmas tree stand or a fireworks store, because that yes, maybe all of your revenue happens in November and December for the Christmas tree store, but it's going to happen every year, and you can feel pretty confident in that. Add to that not just seasonality, but variability. So when you add in how much is it going to snow, and how does that impact your revenue, that got really tricky. And it was a stumbling block. It was a hurdle. I don't know what you want to, positively, maybe it's a hurdle. Negatively, it's a stumbling block for investors to wrap their, and for me to wrap my head around. And what's tricky is that the easiest measure of that would be snowfall inches. And so, in Green Bay, we get 40 to 65 inches of snow every year, averages about 54 inches of snow. And how much revenue do we get if we get 54 inches of snow? But Will, remind me where you're based.
I'm in Arlington, Virginia. So we get like one or two big snows a year generally.
But there's a really big difference in those snowstorms of whether it's wet and heavy or light and fluffy. And so are we getting, two 10-inch storms for 20 inches, or are we getting 10 2-inch storms? And so our revenue is not just going to be, you can't just look at how many inches of snow you got, but the composition of the snow, the ground temperature, the air temperature, moisture content, all the rest of these things. And so, trying to kind of map that out there, for me, I reached a point where I saw it more like a farmer, where we know that, these acres are going to produce this many bushels of corn on a normal year. In a year where there's drought or an abundance of rain, that number is going to go up and down. But we know that sort of there's this baseline expectation, and therefore there's this baseline expectation of revenue. And while climate change is impacting us, we think that it will continue to snow for the foreseeable future where we are in the states where we operate. And if anything, climate change is impacting us with not necessarily less snow, but a broader range of storm scenarios. And so for the well-prepared customer who values the service, having the right, vendor is more important than ever, because I'm in Green Bay, and we received snow on October 31st. And in Appleton, just down the road, they got 4.5 inches of snow on October 31st, smashing every pre-existing record. Last year we received snow all the way into April. And so, blending this together, there's quite a need for what we do. And so getting your head wrapped around the variability attached to the seasonality was a big push.
Mm-hmm. The transaction, I want to circle back to something you said where they were not wanting to share what they considered sensitive information with you because they are now scared. They've had one transaction fall apart, and I guess they have now trust issues with buyers. How did you convince them to indeed share with you? Or did you just actually have to forego getting every single piece of information that you would have liked?
Great question. Probably a little bit of both. So, I think that there was always some gaps where it was, they were very hesitant to provide certain chunks of information. Really nervous to show me actual contracts that were, signed contracts with customers. They felt that their pricing methodology was proprietary, and so they didn't want to share how they priced the services that they rendered until very, very late in the process, and would give me sort of roundabout answers to these things that showed that there was a methodology that I should be confident in, but not necessarily unveiling the information. They were comfortable sharing their top 10 customers, but customers 11 through, whatever, they wanted to keep them with the customer ID on them, but were willing to give me multiple years of data that had the same customer ID so that I could track revenue and churn and the other, sort of traditional recurring revenue metrics over time, expansion, et cetera. And so, while I didn't necessarily know who every customer was, there also was a point where it's like, okay, if these numbers are accurate and they have been, through a Q of E, and, I worked with Boulay for the Q of E and for tax stuff, if the lawyers are comfortable with this, then maybe there's that, everybody's going to talk about the relationship with the seller and feeling like, I'm going to discover the skeletons in the closet at some point. If you can help me discover them faster, this is going to go better. And so I felt like there came a point where, while they were blurring information, I reached a point where at least I was comfortable enough to keep proceeding.
And can you tell us anything about the acquisition price?
Sure. Acquired the company for $12 million, which was just under, it was like maybe a 5.7 or 5.8x when it was all said and done. Again, talking about agreed upon EBITDA. So right in that range.
Great. I'm understanding that their margins before or pre-transaction were inflated, or they were just destined to come down in one way or another. It's still an impressive business. I mean, 5 or 6 employees generating around $2 million a year of profit.
Yeah, and on the other hand, I stepped into a company where, the newest iPhone in the company, this is 2021, the newest phone that they had on their desks was iPhone 5. The newest laptop was we had one laptop in the company, all the rest were desktops, in most cases with a single, or in some cases dual monitors that were 20-inch or 21-inch monitors, et cetera. There was a lack of investment. I think the seller had reached a point of satisfaction in terms of the investment that he had made to get the company to where it was. This entire another piece of the transaction puzzle was this entire transaction happened during COVID. And so the first time that I ever met the sellers face to face, like in person, live in person, was the night before the transaction was to be completed. The signatures were already in escrow. And I drove to Green Bay, and we went out to dinner. And we finished up dinner at maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And as we're walking to our cars to go our separate ways, the seller's wife said, "Hey, do you want to see the office before tomorrow morning?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that'd probably be a good idea." And I had seen a shakily, filmed, vertically filmed tour of the office. I knew that it existed. It's a essentially asset-free sort of business, and so the office actually didn't matter all that much, whether it even was real or not per se. And so I knew what the office was. I knew the layout of it. I had a blueprint of it, but I never actually went into the office until about 10 o'clock the night before the deal was supposed to be done. At 9 o'clock the next morning was when I walked through and was like, that's where I'm going to be sitting, and that's where so-and-so sits, and that's where so-and-so sits. And so, yeah, super small. And every single team member was beyond their maximum capacity. Many team members were, one of the early stories was, the gentleman who is today our VP of operations, his name is Matt. He came to me about 2 weeks into my ownership and our investment team's ownership of the deal. And so I think it was Thursday night or a Friday night, and everybody had gone home for the day. And I was sitting in my new office, corner office, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young CEO. And he comes in and he's shaking, and his voice is, quivering. And he says, I don't know how to tell you this, Eddy, but I'm moving to Madison, Wisconsin, and that's, 2.5, 3 hours away from here. And I'm sitting there and I probably flabbergasted, mouth down on my chest, and closed my mouth and okay. I've accepted it. I have another job opportunity there, and my one-on-one with the seller, the transaction was announced on a Monday morning, and on Tuesday he was going to have his one-on-one with the sellers, and in that meeting he was going to announce his resignation and that he was planning to move. And so here I am 2 weeks into it, and I've circled in my diligence process my key man risks, and I particularly circled Matt and said, if this guy leaves, I'm up the creek.
Wow.
And here comes Matt marching in and says, I don't know how to tell you this. And he knows he's key man. He knows he has this thing, and he has been scared for about 2 weeks to tell me this. This whole 2 weeks he's had his, well, could I get you to stay? Well, I actually have already bought a house there.
Oh,
and I'm like, oh, okay.
So it's not a negotiating tactic.
When are you moving? The end of this month. Well, could I convince you to stay longer? And we ended up working it out so that he ended up staying for about 4 months before he moved there. And today he works fully remotely. He comes to Green Bay on at least a monthly basis and spends about a week with us here in the office as we've grown our team. He's continued to be just an exceptionally faithful servant leader, supporting our growth. But these sort of early things, and part of the reason that I believe he was moved to Madison was because the amount of stress and strain he felt that we're running this entire business with just 5 people, and a lot of that weight was on his shoulders. A lot of the processes and procedures that you would find in small businesses or absent in small businesses, that storyline is definitely an Earth Development story, where we've grown our team to allow our team to have redundancy so that, in an industry where we're working 24/7 during the wintertime, Matt was on 24/7 call all winter long with no backup. And so, if he got sick or if he did anything, he was the only person who could do parts of his job, and that just wasn't healthy. So yeah, a lot of early stories, a lot of early adventures that we had along the way.
But it's amazing. So you've retained him the whole time.
Retained him the whole time, and of that initial 5 or 6, one gentleman was kind of already on his. I terminated a gentleman pretty early on who kind of already had one foot out the door, and we knew that. And then another team member, when I arrived, was going to school to get her real estate realtor license, and so that was not an unexpected departure. But of that original group, I think 4 of the original 6 are still a part of our team. And when you talk about acquiring a business, you're buying hopefully a healthy business. And what are you really buying? You're buying the team and the potential. In my case, that has been extremely true, where it's like a bet was on the people. We don't do anything there's not a secret sauce to cutting the grass. We don't have a technology that makes us wildly better. We're not a pharmaceutical company with, intellectual property or a secret formula. What makes Earth Development better is our team, and making sure that, they're delighted with the opportunity to work here, see potential in their future, et cetera. That's what I spend a lot of my time on today, is just building the absolute best team for our future that we're going to need.
Well, and build a team you have, because if you went from 5, 6 people to over 20, you've quadrupled the team. And if in fact you lost 2 people and it was down to 4, and 4 to 20 and above, I mean, you've quintupled it. Yeah. Is that all basically just to give the needed capacity? I assume no. You've also added in a layer of management. Tell us a little bit about what the team structurally looks like different now than it did before.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I arrived, we had I was serving as the president and CEO. It had previously been the husband and wife, kind of in a while the seller husband was named the CEO, and the wife was vice president or whatever her title was. They effectively, in my opinion, would be co-CEOs, mutually leading the company. And then this gentleman, Matt, at one point was serving as the general manager of the company. And prior to my arrival, they had, probably in part for hygiene and sellability, had hired a head of sales to probably create not necessarily the illusion that it wasn't seller, that the owner was doing all of the selling. He was not doing all of the selling, but I think in order to increase the visual that he was not doing all the selling. They had hired a very ineffective head of sales. And so that was the gentleman that was let go very quickly after I got here. And they had also hired I think he's called accounting manager. And so, essentially there was one salesperson, one head of sales. Why do you need a head of sales when there's only one salesperson? I don't really know. But head of sales and a salesperson, Matt as the head of operations, a finance accounting person, one person whose title was account manager who did all of the customer support and customer service, and then one person who was worked with our service partners to coordinate our service partners, again across 5 states at the time and 450 locations or whatever we were serving. We were taking care of that with that team. And so today, we have a VP of operations, which is Matt. He continues in that sort of capacity. We've shifted his load to make it more accurately the role of a VP of operations. So he's not doing all of the things that he did when I first arrived here. We have a team member who's our CFO. We have a head of sales and marketing, and then myself. And so a 3-person executive team, or 4 when you add me into that. And then, we have, let's say 3 or 4 divisions. And again, small company, but we have a sales organization that has salespeople as well as account managers who manage the ongoing revenue lifecycle management post acquiring or winning the sale. We have an operations team that's basically split into 3 pieces. One of them is customer support and serving, meeting the needs of our customers. Field operations supervisors who make sure that our service partners are doing what they are supposed to be doing, and then service partner recruiting all fall into our operations team, and then accounting. And our accounting team is made up of all the normal functions that you'd find in accounting. And so that's the core of it. And then we have a gentleman who serves as a project manager and is helping with sort of the growth initiatives and making sure that we keep pushing the boundaries of what's capable.
Well, speaking of what's possible here, you've built out your team, you've doubled revenue, although but these investments, this J curve means that EBITDA is about flat, but you're primed in position to really push that EBITDA now. This is a traditional search fund, so you have investors who would like to get A, their capital back, and B, more capital on top of that original capital. So that is one of the features of traditional search funds, where there's a bit of an expectation, or maybe more than a bit of an expectation, that there will be an exit event, although not a requirement. These things are all very circumstantial. So what does a great outcome look like for you on this adventure, Eddy, as a last question?
Yeah. So I think for me, so first, like I said earlier, the story isn't finished being told. And so I don't know how this is going to turn out. And it's like you just said, there's a lot of different permutations that can take place. So certainly there's that expectation of return, but there's a lot of different ways to deliver it. Right now, and I mean this with all sincerity, I get asked this every once in a while by a team member, by friends in the Green Bay area, et cetera, of like, what's the plan? And for right now, it's, focus on building a great place that I would like to continue to work at for the rest of my professional career. And by doing that, it will be an attractive place for somebody else to come and work and join my team, or for somebody to come in and ultimately acquire us, or however what that would look like. I right now I don't know what I would do that would be more fun and more challenging, more stimulating, more rewarding than what I do today. So, the idea that after 5 to 7 years, you're going to have an exit and you're going to make a bunch of money and you sail off into the sunset. Like, I really like what I do. And, imagining that, okay, I'm going to go out and do this again, or become an investor, or, maybe pursue that plan to become a professor, a lecturer at a business school or whatever, or at a college. Those are all things that, that's possible, but, the journey is like, I can't, it's hard to almost envision some of that because, to be a young person, I'm 40 now. And so, to be 45, what are you going to do for the next 25 years, next 30, 40 years, and what would be more fun and more rewarding than what I'm doing now?
Yeah.
I don't know. And so for right now, keep your head down, focus on building the very best place to work. That I like coming to work every day. I like the people that we work with, that we're achieving things together. That's the, and build a killer team. That's the dream right now. And keep pushing the boundaries every day.
Eddy, if people want to reach out to you, how do you prefer they do that?
Probably LinkedIn is easiest. Eddy Zakes, Eddy Zakes. You can find me there. And yeah, I love talking search funds. Going back to those days at IESE, I find the topic endlessly interesting, and love seeing the growth of the model. And thanks for the work that you're doing, Will, to share these stories. And yeah, my story is only my story, and so everybody's going to have their own, and they don't need to do it the way that I did it. I used to say, like, I would pretend and slide across a release waiver and say, before we talk, I need you to sign a release waiver that that my advice is often bad, that my experience is only my own, that you're going to talk to more people than just me, and you're going to get ideas from a wide range of people and get a lot of perspectives. And so happy to share my perspective, but it is only my perspective. It is only my experience, and all of your listeners, all of your audiences agreed to my release waiver by virtue of continuing to listen to this conversation.
Was there anything, Eddy, you wanted to say or share that I didn't ask you?
I would just say, a hearty thanks to all the people who have helped me to get to where I am. I consider myself extraordinarily privileged, and I don't know that in foresight I could ever have imagined being where I am. And if you looked at the back of the tapestry, the front of the tapestry, went to a great business school, had this stint in venture capital, worked in the nonprofit sector, did this entrepreneurial thing before the MBA, grew up in a family business environment that wasn't my family. The story looks beautiful, and it makes perfect sense, kind of, from the front of the tapestry. And if you flip the tapestry around, those threads are just a jumble of chaos. And there's so many people that took a chance on me and invested above and beyond in my success, who said a kind word and offered a smile, offered a kick in the pants when that was what was necessary. And to all those people, I would say a big thank you. And then hopefully I've made you proud. Thank you to all of those people. That would be very important to me.
Great. Eddy Zakes, thanks very much for coming on and sharing your story.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.